You're listening to the Call Kent podcast, where Kent C. Dodds answers questions and gives insights to software engineers like you. Now, let's hear the call.
Hey Kent, it's Jan. I was wondering, imagine you are building a user interface for switching roles in an organization, and it's a drop-down menu. So each of the buttons in Remix will submit a form, right? Would you rather wrap all buttons in one form and then give each button their own intent and their own value? Or would you create a form for each of the roles in that drop-down menu to pick a role? What approach would you choose and why? Thank you very much for answering. Bye.
And that was the call. Here's what Kent had to say.
Hey, Jan. Thank you so much for the question. Good one. So the decision on whether to do a single form or multiple forms comes down to whether you want to be able to submit more than one of these at once. And that also actually comes to whether you want to have a navigation associated to these. So if the user submitting this form is going to take them to some other page, then that makes sense to have it be its own form. But let's say that the user can submit multiple one of these and have them all be in flight, and that sort of use case makes sense. Then having them each have their own individual form makes more sense. And I would add, though, that it actually it doesn't matter a whole lot whether you're using multiple forms or a single form. Even if each one of them will submit and have you go to a different page, you can even still use a separate form for each one of them, just because structurally that makes more sense or it's more sensible. And so the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that you probably shouldn't have it share the same form if they're going to be specifying a different action. Now, the submit button can actually specify a form action prop so that you can override the action that a button takes. But in that case, I think it just makes more sense to have them be multiple individual forms. So yeah, there are a couple options that you've got here for yourself on what you do, but I think in this situation, I would probably do an individual form for each one. But I don't know. I think I would be more interested in what it looks like in the code than what is semantically correct here, because I think either one works just fine. But I will say that for sure, if they can all be in flight at once, like user submits this one and then they submit that one and then they submit this one, if that is a reasonable use case, then for sure you do want to have separate forms, because you'll want to manage their state separately, especially in the web. What typically will happen with form submission is any other navigation that's going on will get canceled. Now, that doesn't actually technically cancel it to the server unless you're like uploading a file or something. But there is some implication there. When we're progressively enhancing and now we have JavaScript on the page, we can do multiple submissions. But even in that, Remix is trying to emulate the browser. So if you have a single form and the user submits it and then they submit it again, then the previous submission is going to get canceled. That may or may not be what you're going for, what you need for your specific use case. But if it makes sense for them to have multiple in flight at the same time, then you should have separate forms for each one. I hope that answers your question, and good luck with all the stuff that you're building.
This has been the Call Kent podcast. Learn more about Kent at kentcdodds.com and get your own questions answered at kentcdodds.com/calls.